So, good evening and welcome. I know it's late in the day and it's a very warm room after the session, which was in here before, because it was completely packed for 2 hours and there's no way you can do any further ventilation. So, I think we just have to try and do our best to keep you awake, and hopefully, we can do that. And hopefully, you will also be able to contribute. It's a little like a school class right now. It feels everybody's sitting at the back and nobody wants to come to the first. But so be it. I mean, I hope that you're not planning on leaving, and I hope more people will come. We have almost the whole panel here. We just heard from the French government who's coming to talk about the buildings initiative, that they are in a coordination, and the GCF. We don't know exactly when they will come, but we hope they will. And my name is John Christensen, by the way. I'm director of something called the UNEP DTU Partnership. It's a collaborating center with UNEP located in Copenhagen. And I'm also here representing this acronym here. I don't know if you all know it, but it's called Sustainable Energy for All. It's a big global initiative led by the Secretary General of the UN and the World Bank President in a kind of public-private setup. So it's not really UN, but it's trying to engage governments, institutions, private sector in working on 3 targets associated with access for all, renewable increase and efficiency increase, and you can go and look at all the details. I'll come back to some of it later on, but we are the energy efficiency hub up in Copenhagen, and that's one of the reasons I'm talking about efficiency today, of course. Good. Before we start with the panel, I promised to give a little bit of context, because, I mean, this is part of the Climate Action Fair, and I think many of you probably have been part of the Climate Action Fair without knowing it, that it's on. It's the different TEMs, it's the different exhibitions and so on that you can see outside. There was a TEM yesterday, and there'll be one on Monday on transport all day. So I think if you're interested in these issues, please come back on Monday, and you can also pick up these ones and get more information about the whole thing. And so, I mean, transport is a new TEM, and the one that was about what was social value of carbon. No, I can't remember the exact title. That social and economic value yesterday was also one of the new TEMs. So last year we had 2 TEMs on the technical expert meetings on renewables and on efficiency and urban environments. And I think this is really a nice feature, that you then come back the next year to try and look at what did you then actually do about it. That you don't just sort of present it, but that you come back later on and say, well, we actually have done something, and hopefully we can show that. So I think it's a really nice feature that has come up. And at the time, of course, they were selected, and because both these issues, renewables and energy efficiency and cities as one of the implementing levels, is really 2 of the critical areas if you want to look at short-term action and enhance an ambition. I think most of what we talk about is pre-2020, and that's what we've been looking at in the TEMs in general. But I think reflecting on Paris and what came out of Paris and the INDCs going into Paris, if you look at the INDCs, I think it's close to 98% of the INDCs have the energy sector as one of the key areas on the mitigation side. And so I think while we're looking at the short-term action, I think it's important to see how it feeds into the future process, because a lot of the things that we put in place now are going to be really important for how far you can go in the next 10 years. Because if you just wait till 2020 starting all these things, it's going to be really difficult to do all the things that countries promise to do. So I see it as focusing on the short term, but having a very strong link into what is there. And as I said, the INDCs have paved the way for this. I think the final thing before we get into the substance is maybe to mention that based on the TEMs last year, the Secretariat prepared a technical report and a policy summary of the processes for last year. That's a really good reading, and it provides, you could say, focus on good practices, policies, things can be scaled up and replicated and so on, because a lot of what we present is examples from one country or region that many other countries can easily pick up and replicate and adapt to their own circumstances. Good. So what we will focus on today is really some of the main initiatives. We can't cover everything, and it's going to be very short presentations. So afterwards, if you're interested in more detail, you can go to the Secretariat website. There'll be, in many cases, longer presentations available there than what we're able to present. They have 3 minutes each, and I'm not normally a tough chairman, but I think I need to be today because everybody needs to do something else. So I think that's maybe enough on process, but I think maybe with the excuse that it's faster than I will actually start out myself, which is maybe a little rude as chairman. But I think also because with Sustainable Energy for All, it's to some extent the framework for some of the other initiatives. And also we work closely with ICLEI on the implementation and the city parts of it. I'll come back to that. So let's see if we can get it up. Can you get my presentation up? Good. So this is the context. As I said, Sustainable Energy for All. We are the Copenhagen Center on Energy Efficiency, which is called the Energy Efficiency Hub of the initiative. Done in the auspices of UNEP, but since Situni is here, my colleague from UNEP, I mean, I'll do more the sustainable energy hat today, and then we can do the UNEP one. And I'll go very quickly through the first process, and I actually need to pull it up here so that I can see my own slides. I mean, basically looking at the process that we saw last year, because the targets I talked about and mentioned they're related to the SDG 7. There's sort of complete overlap between the SDG 7 on energy and the targets for Sustainable Energy for All. And I think Sustainable Energy for All will be partly the implementing mechanism, but also the monitoring and reporting mechanism. What we did for the COP was to present both on renewables and energy efficiency some of the key activities within Sustainable Energy for All. And some of it was presented yesterday, where there's the follow-up on the renewable side. Today we focus on the efficiency side. What we presented were basically two things. Something that I'll come back to on the next slide, or the next one, is it's called a Global Energy Efficiency Accelerator Platform. It's an awfully long name, but I'll explain to you what it is. So basically, public-private sector engagement in a number of key energy efficiency areas that we presented as one of the main things in the LPEA sessions in Paris. I'll tell you a little bit about the progress on that. And then in addition to that, there was a campaign about commitments, and as I said, 100 jurisdictions, which could be cities or countries, 100 companies, 100 financial institutions, basically signed up to the overall target, and some of them with very concrete commitments to ways of engaging. And what we're looking at now is partly, you could say, a management change of Sustainable Energy for All, where we had the CEO was a guy called Kande Jumkeller, who came from UNIDO and was excellent in terms of building up the process. He's gone home to run for president in Sierra Leone, so had a very good excuse for leaving. At the same time, I think it was a good time overall, because now it's moving very much to implementation, which is sort of the follow-up from Paris in general. So the new CEO that has been appointed is a woman called Rachel Kite, who was a vice president in the World Bank before. And of course, her mantra is, the first word is implementation, implementation, and implementation. And there's a new strategy out from the new management team just last week. I don't know if it's public yet, but it will be very soon after the advisory board looked at it. But really, as it says, focusing on really brokering the leaders and partnerships, trying to increasingly unlock finance for the investments, and again, documenting the good stories, the bad stories, what worked, what didn't work, what other people can do, and so on. It's not going to be a funding mechanism. It's really a political awareness process and support mechanism that can demonstrate things, and also you can come under the banner and do all kinds of good things. If you go and look at the slides afterwards, then this is sort of reflecting the new strategy. I don't want to go in detail with it here, because it's really not what it's about, but please have a look. If you're interested in the initiative as such, the slide describes in a very compact form what the new directions are. And then what I'll focus on is what we've done since we talked about in Paris. We had this series of accelerators. We have one on buildings, focusing on cities, also together with ICLEI. We have another one on district energy, also focusing on cities, looking at district heating and district cooling. Then we have one for the industrial sector, and then we have two on lighting and appliances and equipment that Situna will talk about, and we'll also hear more about buildings, both from, I guess, from IEA and also from the French government, because there's a big initiative on top of this that came out of Paris. So if I just take the two or three that we are separate on, I mean, it has the details in there, but basically, I mean, the building efficiency was just formed last year. It has about 30 organizations active now, and it's been funded also by Jeff recently, so they've really been able to scale up things. They right now have somewhere between 20 to 25 cities or subnational governments engaged in the initiative, and all of that has actually happened since Paris. So it's really a very, very steep development of that. On district energy, we have the same process. We have a really broad partnership with UNEP and partly a Danish company called Danfoss leading, but also the European Heating Association and the US-based energy, well, I can't remember the name right now, but the similar institutional partnership in the US around heating and cooling. And then a lot of private companies, we have organizations like ICLEI, we have Habitat and other people who are interested in it, and a lot of NGOs also. And again, here we have, since we've met in Paris, I mean, we have actually done 2025 training and outreach events. We have right now in the order of 100 cities who lined up because they're interesting. We started sort of pilot activities in 3 to 5 cities in China, India, Eastern Europe, and that's going to basically expand and continue. So it's about the acceleration. I think in all these areas, the technologies to do more efficient things are available. Not to say you should stop any technology development at all, but I think right now it's about scaling up and accelerating what is already happening and what can be easily disseminated further. I think I'm going to stop here because we're going to hear more about cities. You're going to hear more about lighting and appliances in details. You're going to hear more about buildings. And then, of course, we'll talk about technical and financial assistance. And hopefully, if we get the Green Climate Fund, you can talk about the big scale investments also. So thank you very much. I think we're going to take the presentations very quickly, and then we can come back to a more broad question and answer at the end of it. Otherwise, it probably takes too long. Good. So the next one I'm happy to introduce is Marieke van Staten from ICLEI. She was very much part of the TEMs last year, and well, many of the rest of them were too. But and as I said, partnership both on buildings and district energy and so on. So welcome, Marieke.
Thank you very much, John. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. A real pleasure to be here again. I'm going to zoom in on one specific activity that we started as ICLEI in partnership with many, many organizations called the TAP, the Transformative Actions Program. We launched this last year basically as a pilot, as a test to see if we can actually populate city demand projects into a project pipeline and connect these projects to financing. Understanding that financing city and regional action is quite challenging in many countries. And the TAP was developed to be ambitious, cross-cutting, and inclusive as its overall strategy. And we were really delighted to receive 125 applications from 89 cities across 43 countries. So it's very much was not a call only to the global south, it was a call to subnational governments, cities and states and regions. And the surprise was also the global north responded, clearly also showing that there is a need for financing, and we need to also address how we can shape that. Now, the total investment that we calculated for those applications that could also quantify it, which were also not all of them, is already a staggering amount that we see the need for. And this is just like really the tip of the iceberg. And of that amount, 42% come from developing countries. So clearly there we can connect it to the Green Climate Fund and other financing mechanisms that actively support the global south, but we have a gap for the global north. Our aim was also to then connect to public and private investors, funding institutions, to understand why funding isn't easily accessible to the local and subnational level, and to talk and discuss how we can change that or maybe create new financing mechanisms. So this links to the CCFLA work, the Cities or Climate, what is it called, CCFLA, all these abbreviations. In any case, one of those wonderful initiatives launched in New York a few years ago. The TAP applications covered mitigation and or adaptation. And if you look at the spread, we've got a range of topics. So some are sectoral, some are very broad, more the climate action plans that were submitted where cities cannot find funding for actually implementing their action plans. And we were delighted to have this partnership. If you see at the bottom, all these logos were our partners at the COP21 at the Cities and Regions Pavilion. This year, we're checking with all of them again. Do they wish to remain partners in the TAP? And if they do, we want them to really, really become active with us and really support and map that we get those synergies going and running. Next slide, please. Oh, okay, sorry, thank you. So progress since the COP21. We had an amazing pavilion at the COP21 for those of you who had the opportunity to join us in the green zone. Unfortunately, we were a bit disconnected from the blue zone because of the security issues, but we'll fix that hopefully in Morocco. But we've had the opportunity to work with groups and partners like WWF and the South Pole Group on a project called Locale, where we've done a gap analysis report to really understand the gap, the financing gap between finance and local climate action. We've had our first workshop this year in DC on the periphery of the Climate Action Summit with cities, with funding institutions to also delve into that a little bit deeper. And I think we're starting to better understand each other. One of the problems is we use different language. We're not using the same wording, and that we need to get that convergence on how we speak to and with each other from the cities, from the regions to the the financing institutions. One of the highlights was that we've seen also from the Canadian side was a commitment from the federal budget of more than 200 million, which also is connected directly to the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. These are the kinds of commitments we want to see, because that's national government money going to the cities in country as seed money, essentially, because then we need the private sector to really support further investments and really scale up the climate action. The potential is there, we know that, and now we also wish to make sure that we can support the acceleration. Second last point, we've already received commitments also from the World Bank to really work with us, offering in-kind contribution to focus on enhancing the bankability of some of the projects. We've seen that quality is a challenge, so we do need to get more support for capacity building for cities and regions and the governments to enhance the quality of the projects, to make them bankable where they can be bankable, and those that cannot be bankable, more in the region of resilience typically, to find ways of getting them financed. Similar conversation is going on with AFD, with UN Habitat and several others. So if you're interested in exploring with us, please connect. Last point on this particular topic, we also want to connect what we do in the TAP to the GEF Integrated Action Program for Sustainable Cities. There's huge potential there to link it up and to scale up. Next slide, please. Last slide, continuing on the progress we made since last year. We are speaking to the Green Climate Fund, as I guess everybody is, who wishes to support the Global South. But there are models where we can connect the TAP to the GCF readiness program, and also engaging as an executive agency. So let's explore these options. These are new options. It's also challenging to shape and map them and see where we go from here. Last but not least, COP22 is obviously going to offer an exciting possibility to showcase what we've done in the space, in particular at the Low Emissions or Low Carbon Solutions Conference that we will organize together with the Kingdom of Morocco, SN and the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. So that's going to be an interactive space where we can speak with and to you and hear some great examples of action. As a next step, the TAP is embedded in the LPAA process. So we also wish to explore in that frame how we can connect to more national governments specifically. And we wish to really fast track the better quality projects applications and work also with the capacity building and making more TAP projects robust and getting that pipeline populated. We'll release a new call at the end of this year to get the next batch of projects in there with hopefully with all our partners and many more. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yeah, please get. Good. As I said before, we are on a short time schedule, so I'll not do any attempt to summarize anything. And I think it was already a summary of a lot of interesting information to begin with. So I'll just move on and ask Brian Dean from the IEA. He comes from, I guess, the Energy Efficiency Division in IEA now. And so I think what you have on the paper may not be completely correct, but he's from the IEA for sure.
Thanks, John. Yes, yeah, I'm in the Energy Efficiency Division where I focus on buildings. And we've been working particularly with one particular program, which is our energy efficiency in the emerging economies. And this is a 4-year program that just started a couple of years ago, focusing on delivering energy efficiency into the major emerging economies. So you can see we're focused on sort of the largest energy using countries that are aid eligible through the OECD. In addition to that, we've been able to deliver trainings. So in June this year, we're having an energy efficiency training week for government officials in 40 of the developing and emerging economies. That represents 45% of the global energy consumption. So This and our other activities, we're really focused on a different set of activities from the IEA compared to historic IEA activities. And we're working on implementation, we're working on policy development, target setting, helping the governments set up evaluation processes and things like that. So it's a very different type of effort compared to what the IEA has done in the past. And of course, we've been collaborating a lot. Here's some of the organizations, and here on the next slide, you can see some of our collaborations since COP21. The very first one, the Global Alliance for Building Construction, which Remy will talk a little bit more about. But I've been involved in a few working groups for that, setting up activities. And this has been a coalition that's trying to get all of us on the same page, using the same data sets, the same policy approaches and implementation approaches. So I think this is actually an effort that could really help out. I mentioned the Building Efficiency Accelerator here as well. Efficiency Accelerator is also involved with this global alliance, and so a lot of our organizations are coming together. We're all working on things that are improving the energy efficiency globally, but putting us all on the same table in this global alliance is hopefully going to prove to be effective in having less duplication of effort, I guess, is one of the problems that's been in the past. We're also working on the Global Tracking Framework through the Sustainable Energy for All and the Tracking Clean Energy Progress. Those two particular activities are using IEA's data sets and our ability to capture how energy is being used globally. And we're able to report out both through the Clean Energy Ministerial and C4All. And now the latest is going to be the Global Alliance for Building and Construction, where there'll be a focus specifically on the building sector. There's a plan we've been working on to have a global tracking report for that, just specifically for buildings. And the very last point on the lower left is the IEA has done a lot of analysis for the COP process and has analyzed what we think the INDCs will do for emissions, and developed a scenario called the bridge scenario, which includes 5 measures that we think will enable even more improvements in reducing emissions. About half of that is energy efficiency. So it's this particular group is important in terms of getting beyond the INDCs. And then on the right, I've got the flower from the Multiple Benefits book that came out in 2014. But at the COP, we introduced this topic of the energy efficient prosperity. And the idea is that energy efficiency enables both economic and social development. And if you look at the items around the flower, you'll see there's a lot of those that are helping particularly the developing and emerging economies, see the benefit in energy efficiency and hopefully investing in it. So that's all available on our website. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Brian. Very interesting presentation, and what we're really happy about also both in UNEP and in Sustainable Energy for All overall is of course that, as you said already in the presentation, a lot of these things are really collaborations between the different involved institutions, and even the training we are contributing a little bit to, but also all the other areas you mentioned. So that's really great. Without putting the burden on the next ones, I just want to say we had a little brief meeting before we came in, and I tried to tell everybody that 3 minutes is not a long time. I guess Marika took 5, Brian took 4, so it's not badly done, but it's anyway, we have time for it. I just agreed with Situna. I hope it's okay with you, Remy, also, because it makes more sense to go straight into the French presentation on the Global Alliance for Buildings and Constructions, because Brian was talking about already, and then we can hear about, you say, almost the inside of the buildings afterwards on the appliances and lighting and so on. So please, Remy, it's your turn.
So thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. My name is Remy. I'm working in the French team, COP21 team, and the Action Agenda area. And I was involved in the building of this Action Agenda and development of these initiatives. And maybe I will start by apologize for presenting the excuses of Sylvie Lemay, which was the facilitator of this technical expert meeting last year, which could not attend this meeting, but she would have loved to because she was the one really involved in this global alliance for building and construction. So in a nutshell, I would present what this initiative is about, where we are here today, where we are, how we advanced so far, and what we think it could be useful to get from this technical expert meeting. But maybe I will start by telling you that the idea, I think, was tested here last year. We were thinking since 2014 about this idea because there were several attempts also to see what could be done more globally on the building parts. You all know that I think it's a huge part of the emissions and of the energy consumption. There are several initiatives existing and that really doing great job, but we were thinking that the scale was not here. So we are really thinking about that. And last year during this technical expert meeting, we see what was the appetite also for going further in this area. And we really get back with this idea and with UNEP colleagues and other initiatives that we need to gather forces because these several initiatives need to discuss and build these synergies that you just have touched upon and launch something that could be kind of an umbrella for this very global thematic that need to mobilize more on political level, mobilize the different ministers that are involved in that are maybe not so closely linked to the negotiation and to the climate space. And so that was the idea of launching this global alliance for building and construction. So, sorry, in a nutshell, so it was discussed last year and launched during the COP, during the building day of the action agenda. With 21 countries now on board from different part of the world. Brazil is in board, US, Mexico, Vietnam, France, Germany. So I won't list them all, but very huge and interesting group of countries, and also companies starting to be interested in coming there. And of course, also working with all the existing initiatives and partners to build on what exists and try to find the gaps and new ways to advance. The main objective of the Alliance, I think, is to try to implement in the building sector the Paris Agreement. So it means working on the different elements from the trying to have a global picture of what is a pathway for the 2 degrees in this sector, trying to help implement the INDCs for countries, trying also to get commitments and cooperation from the non-state actors, because in the building sector, you get a very scattered world of companies, of the local authorities play a key role in that. And I think, touched upon also this issue before. And so really the idea to gather people around commitments of this 2 degree trajectory and try to develop concrete projects to reach that. And so we really think the added value of this initiative, of this umbrella initiative, is first to bring this political awareness on the topic, to gather commitment from actors. Still need to do, this is very important because some of them are not so aware of the climate change challenge. To develop and scale up some international program, transversal programs, align the objective. And also, as I said, to work with all the value chain of this sector, because it's a very complex sector. So where are we now on this alliance? So it's a young umbrella alliance. The first working group meeting was held in April in Paris. And so the idea is now to really deep dive into some precise work program. And so here you can see the 5 areas in which the group will try to work, and the first thoughts on what could be delivered at the COP22, because we're really trying to work step by step and having some plans for the next phase. So here I think what could be useful is to get some feedbacks and maybe recruit some more countries that could be interested in this project. One point I haven't touched upon, but we really think that this alliance should also aim at supporting countries in the development of their strategies and in the implementation of their INDC. So really, if some countries are interested by coming on board, we think it could be very useful to have them and see how we can develop some program together. The idea now is really to develop some concrete proposal, and France is working on 2 ideas with some partners, one on building in hot climate zone, because there's a lot of thoughts developed in the northern hemisphere for cold areas, but we think also the building in the hot climate zone are some particularity, and so the idea is to gather and to see how to develop building codes together, how to advance a bit faster on that, and how to to build on the example, for instance, from Tunisia, which is one of the partners, which has a great program on heat boiler, solar boiler, that could be really interesting to replicate and disseminate faster. And we're also working on a financing tool for energy efficient building and trying to see how we can replicate that with the different donors to have some facilities developed for INDC or building strategy implementation. So really, I hope this time will be an opportunity to discuss if you have some ideas about what are the gaps in this area to build upon and how we can use this kind of alliance to support and bridge this kind of gap. And of course, if you have some other question on the action agenda, I'm really here also happy to answer.
Good. Thanks very much. Yeah, a very interesting outcome of Paris, maybe not so much in terms of actual concrete tons or something like that, but with real huge potential. I think when we started the efficiency work on the building accelerator, I mean, it was actually the most difficult area because there were so many different initiatives that were happening, and at the same time, everybody is quite clear that buildings is one of the really most important areas to focus on. So if you can actually manage to bring it together and really create synergies and collaboration, that would be a really great achievement in itself. Good, then, as I said, we jumped Situni from my colleague from UNEP in Paris, who's going to talk about what we call United for Efficiency, and he can explain what that is. Situni, please.
Okay, thanks, John. Good evening, everyone. So I'm going to talk about three things. First is to explain very briefly why actually energy efficiency is important in the context of climate change. Second is to illustrate that with this example of looking at appliances and equipment. And third, to tell you how much progress we're making in this and how much you can actually achieve more. So if I start first of all with the importance of energy efficiency. So we're all actually working towards one objective, which is to stay below 2 degrees C. That's the climate objective everyone knows. So it's a path basically we're all taking to stay below that, avoid dangerous climate change. What energy efficiency will allow us to do is to be halfway that path just by being efficient in the electricity we use. As simple as that. So all the presentations you hear and the illustrations of being efficient in various forms is actually to reach that. So if you take energy efficiency globally, that's what will allow us to do. So my example here on some appliances and equipment, and those are lighting, the air conditioning you have at home or your fridge, transformers in some of old fridges and other appliances, electric motors, and IT. These are some of the appliances that would have a high impact in reducing the emissions because by making them efficient, they will consume less electricity. So United for Efficiency is looking at these appliances and equipment. And the figures you can see there, by making those 6 appliances efficient, you can reduce emissions, global emissions, by at least 10% a year. And you can achieve 1.25 billion tons of CO2 a year. So these are facts in terms of being efficient in those appliances and equipment. And you can see the other figures there also that provides more evidence as why actually it makes sense to be efficient in those. So this is a typical public-private partnership. So it has private sector there, the manufacturers who have obviously the knowledge about the technologies and how to make them more efficient. We started that with lighting. It was easy to do. It was quite successful. We have 66 countries now that they committed to get rid of the light bulbs that are inefficient, old-fashioned, and bring in LEDs and others that can consume less energy and release much less CO2. What you see at the bottom there is where we are basically. With lighting, we have 66 countries. We are now supporting 48 countries who have actually launched into these programs, and the others are to come. The United for Efficiency as a whole, including lighting, fridges, air conditioning, etc., we have 19 partners that are part of this because the whole partnership is just started actually. Where we are at the moment, if those 48 countries that we're supporting at the moment take action to phase out inefficient lighting and make the other appliances equipment, will save at least 14 million tons of CO2 emissions a year. And in terms of electricity bills to people, that would be 2.75 billion saved a year just by making those appliances equipment. So the other thing I want to say through here is this is not just working per country, but it does actually make the action more efficient when you also work regionally. And this is what I'm trying to show through this map, that we have a number of groups who have the same interest, the same motivation to do this locally in a region to achieve more impact. So I think I'll stop it here. So hopefully I didn't go beyond 3 minutes, and hopefully if there are some questions, then we can answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, Situni. On time, I think you always, all of you are somewhere between 4 and 5, so don't worry about that. I think we're fine, and I hope in the end that you will actually be sort of happy with that, so we can have a real interaction afterwards, because there will be drinks outside at 8. Partly to keep you in here, but also that we use the time efficiently now that we have actually sort of tried to make space for it. I think just to pick up on the last bit, Situni said without too much detail, I think the regional approach and what you described is also, I mean, if you see the difference between the accelerators I talked about in the beginning, some of them are by nature about national level policy, regulation, norm standards, and so on. There, it's hugely beneficial to work regionally, because why should one country change standards if all the other ones are different? You can go across the border and buy different products and so on. So there's a large merit in that. What we started with the buildings and the district energy system is really to move to the city level, which is quite different. And as we heard about on buildings also, I mean, in many cases, some of it is regulation also. You need to link you could say the national and the city level, but the actual action is going to be often about really huge investments. So it's very different type of activities, but of course benefit from the link also. But I think also on the lighting now, it's starting to move. It started with national lighting programs, but now it's also starting a strong focus both on efficient lighting for access, but also at the same time looking at street lighting in cities, because it's a huge area where it's so easy to go out and change, but it's quite heavy investments. And one thing we'll come back to after UCA is really to look at the challenge of getting finance institutions to understand the business of efficiency, because it's so diverse. I think UCA can't solve all of that, but UCA is in the CTC, and he will tell you what it is and what it does. I think what they can help on is certainly on the technical assistance part that can help move some of these activities from the good idea and the demands from cities and countries, and take at least a good step forward, Yuka. So you tell us how you do that.
Thank you very much, and I'm happy to be here addressing this TEM. I hope that you have all heard about what is CTC, and because it is a body under the convention, it's a convention body. So, but I repeat it once again: it's the technical center. Its main purpose is to totally country-driven way give technical assistance to developing countries on their request. The request comes from the national focal point, which is usually nominated by government, usually coming from ministries or some public institutions. But this doesn't mean that we are not giving technical assistance to the entities, companies, cities, and NGOs, for example. It is just that it has to, this request be endorsed by the national focal point, national designated entity, because then we can keep this in the realm of convention. That's the whole idea why parties decided this kind of way. We, of course, work in order to implement whatever the governments have planned for climate actions. And lately, of course, these are the NDCs or INDCs. And of course, for us, very familiar planning tools have been technology need assessments and technology action plans. We are looking at those and look at whether we can forward these into the implementation fundable, bankable projects, and so on. At this moment, CTCN is hosted by UNEP and UNIDO consortium, or LED consortium, which there are 11 consortium partners. But we are also now building up an impressive international network of institutions, now over 160 corporations, academic institutions, organizations, networks have joined us in order to assist developing countries. And that is a resource which we are drawing our expertise from. We have been requested by the Paris COP to give input to this particular process, technical examination process and TEMs. And that means that we will engage, we will report, and we will brief all the TEMs as a CTCN. And we try to bring the voice from the field, whatever we have got. We are a very young organization or service. We have been only there for a couple of years, even less. But we try to give at least that voice which our national focal points on technology have, because they are the countries and parties. And of course, we would like to see that whether this particular process could give us guidance back, that when there are good discussions and conclusions from TEM process, that whether we could bring those messages back to countries and say that this is what we together see as priorities and important issues. Now, what has happened was that in the first year we were not very much known by the countries, so we had to go to the region and tell that the service is available free of charge. 50 to 250,000 worth of technical assistance on the disposal of developing countries. And last autumn started to happen. And as you see, we have 100 or more requests from 60 countries on technology assistance and technical assistance. And many of them are mitigation, and some of them are, or many of them also adaptation. The balance is pretty much still there between adaptation and mitigation projects. And if you look at the mitigation, over 60% of mitigation requests from the developing countries are on energy use and energy supply. So in a way, energy is definitely featuring very, very strongly here. When we were analyzing that, what about these requests which we have on the table on energy efficiency, and looking at the guidance we have got from the TEM process, we have done this kind of distribution of focus areas where you see that energy efficiency, appliances, finance, building, and industries are playing a role. And then we also looked a bit about barriers which the countries have indicated, and indeed, finance, technology, and capacity building barriers are definitely imminent there, but as well there are the questions of insufficient regional regulatory and legal frameworks. So these maybe are those which give some indications of how countries are facing. Let's say that we have really not been there much. Only few technical assistance projects have been concluded, and so we are still learning all the lessons, and hope that somewhere there we can give much more analysis and much more deeper lessons learned what we have done. This is just one example of a country who has come to us in order with a very specific request on how we can assist that country. And these kind of requests are coming from policy level, they come from the very detailed level, feasibility study level, and so on. And we are very happy on the interest that the countries have given to us. I'm happy to answer questions.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Jukka. I don't know if everybody knows, but we're co-located in the sort of UN building in Copenhagen, and I have to say I've been really impressed about what they've been able to do in the short period that Jukka described, and how far they've come even to show implementation 2 years after they even just got the first staff on board. We were supposed to have somebody from the Green Climate Fund, and I don't think, no, Carolina hasn't come, but it's a pity because it would be nice to hear their view also. I think, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I can see a couple of my friends from the Jeff sitting down at the back, and we haven't talked about it, so I'm not going to invite you up here because that would be unfair. But I just want to note that all the things you've heard about lightings, buildings, district energy, appliances has actually all been funded by the GEF. So, I mean, they've been really instrumental. I mean, we're talking about sort of facilitation grants, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 million or whatever, but extremely important for some of these things to move forward. And I think it's something we can also reflect on in the discussion. What does it actually take to move from all these cities, countries, companies being interested to the step where you can actually look at real finance and implementation? Because I think my experience for a long time is that you have lots of good ideas over here and you actually have quite a lot of money over here. And it's a big problem for many countries and cities to actually unlock that finance. And that's something we will focus very heavily on in Sustainable Energy for All, but I'll just use the chance maybe to convey the thanks to the GEF folks for actually being the ones who have helped this thing come along. Because without that, we will still be talking about the ideas and not about what we're doing on pilot level. So much for that. I think we move over. You can ask questions to the presenters if you can remember the presentation from earlier on and note it down. I think before I do that, I just want to note, maybe we should have said it in the beginning, I think the panelist knows, but the session is actually being transmitted on the web, not on video. We have the presentation have been going out, but we've been saying is going out. So just to warn you before you start coming with questions and statements that you will be going live. And I don't know how many we have out there. We talked about how many seconds and minutes normally, what is it? What did it go on YouTube?
Yeah,
YouTube users don't have a long attention span, so don't make it too long. So I think long statements you'll probably pull, so at least throw a few listeners off. But anyway, enough talking, and I think I have a couple of questions prepared, but let's start with the audience, and hopefully you have a lot of things lined up, and it's always difficult to get the first one. So. I heard an interesting, I was at this one Gigaton coalition, and the Norwegian chairman was saying it always takes about 90 seconds for the first one to come. And after that, it works. So I'm patient for another 30 seconds or so. Please. Anyone? Question, comment? Thank you. It was almost
It's an innovative system. You need to catch the mic. Yeah.
Wow.
Energy efficient.
Good.
Okay. Okay.
Fascinating.
Said Moulin, I'm the head of the Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Agency in the Kingdom of Morocco. I was at EIA 2 days ago to sign the MOU with IIA on energy efficiency, monitoring how we can implement that in Morocco. But in the policies, I was listening on all the points, very important technologies, but we managed to change things in Morocco when we stopped subsidizing fossil fuel. By this, all the projects linked to energy efficiency became more and more competitive. And that's a key in the policy, to be coherent. If you want to implement in industry, transport, housing, public lighting, agriculture, all those sectors, and one concerning agriculture was concerning solar pumping. Before we start stopping the subsidies to fossil fuel, it took 10 years for farmers to pay back its solar pump. Now it's only 4 years. So we managed to have the banks financing that because we changed that. So it's very important in those policies to be current on the domestic price at the same time as you introducing new technologies. For housing, we had another approach. You need to train architects. You need to have all the actors in the different regions. So it was not easy. Even in terms of the law, we have a new law concerning réglementation thermique du bâtiment, RTB, in Morocco. To implement it, it took 3 years. To have the legislation, to have the actors to implement it, to have the tools for better isolation in households, you need to have all the possibility to do it everywhere. So implementing new legislation, you need pilot project, you need some support, financing support to train people, to help people, and then you can implement the law. And then, of course, you need also budget for sensibilization and distribution. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Morocco. I mean, it's perfect
Yes,
examples.
excuse
for
me,
others
last
also.
thing, I'm the head of the PPPs for the COP22. So energy efficiency for the COP22 will be a key also. So I'm glad that can I announce you here that what happened in Paris, we're trying to implement it also in Marrakesh for energy efficiency, mainly because there's huge needs, especially in our countries. Thank you.
Sounds fantastic. Can I have your card also? No, I mean, of course, it's exactly what I talked about in the beginning with Sustainable Energy for All, is that you cannot help everybody, but you can actually take the good examples, learn from what they've done, and adapt them to your specific context. Maybe other countries cannot do exactly the same, but I think it's some really important points. I mean, the fossil fuel subsidies, of course, there are separate initiatives working on that in a more global scale also to try and help countries remove that. But of course, if you want to start an efficiency law or anything else, you need to look at what are the barriers. And in many cases, that's of course one of them. We've seen also on other things, I mean, on renewables, access to grid. I mean, you actually have a right to sell to the grid and stuff like that. And on efficiency, a lot of import tariffs that have been designed for other purposes, but actually prevents things from coming in. That would be really fantastic if you wanted them for other purposes. So thank you very much for a wonderful example. I don't know if anybody wants to come, but let's see if there's a few more that become brave by having somebody start. Try the ball. No?
Yeah, I want to continue a bit of that. Definitely this is an issue because when it comes to technology transfer and development, it's an uphill battle if we have to fight against a unlevel playing field with the prices and so on. So that's why, of course, every support to if the governments will move on that. But I participated in this high-level business dialogue of which French presidency organized last year. Very good round of discussions in Paris, in New York, in Tokyo, and so on. And indeed, that also came pretty clear from the business community that they are not afraid of a real prices of energy or fuels or something. They immediately, companies will adjust their budget books according to what is the prevailing landscape. So they were also asking that one. It's just that there are, of course, very dear political and social economic problems in front, and that has to be every country has to solve them first. Thank you.
Thanks, Jukka. Still nobody coming? Okay. Well, I mean, then maybe two issues that I would like to raise. I've been giving a couple of questions from the Secretariat, a little bit about the process here, which I think we can also come back to. But I think I don't know if we're kind of missing the finance people, but I mean, if I can ask the other panelists to a little bit reflect on what I said before, because it's something that I find is really one of the biggest barrier right now is to have that kind of facilitation money that I was praising the DF for contributing to this right now. And we've discussed it in the accelerated context with the companies and so on. And we've actually just got a grant from one of the companies simply to facilitate the process further. That you don't need hundreds of millions to do the sort of scale up facilitation. You may need hundreds of millions and billions when you get to the investments. A lot of what Situni talked about, a lot of what you talked about is not about big investments. It's about changing laws, rules, regulation, mindsets, behavior. And it's really a hard area to come up and get donors to put in the money which is necessary to actually move to the scale that we talk about on the investment side. So I don't know if you want to maybe elaborate a little bit on experiences and ideas about how to overcome it, because for me it's one of the key barriers that we're facing right now, is that we have lots of good ideas, we have lots of good examples, but in order to scale it up and replicate it, we really need to have that kind of facilitation and you could say finance readiness money that can actually get you to the next stage. Situni first.
Okay, I may add some comment on that in terms of the urgency actually of doing that quickly, because you're right. If we consider how actually the global population is evolving and thinking how 9 billion people in 2050 or so is going to increase the demand on energy, on food, on all the resources, then in the context of energy efficiency, you can't actually, in a sense, allow people to buy old technology because you would be locked in. If you buy a fridge now, you're going to keep it like for 10, 15 years or more. So the good thing in terms of energy efficiency is you need to speed up, you need to scale up, you need to get people to get the most efficient technology now. Then you can see the benefits quickly. That's why, in terms of what you were saying about the policies, you need the policies now that actually you can have the change now. That means if you have codes, if you have minimum energy performance standards, the market would only have those technologies that meet those standards. And therefore, the consumers can then buy those technologies that are efficient. So you can see in terms of the rise in middle class, if you like, you have to take that into account, and that's why energy efficiency becomes so urgent and so important. And that's why everything we're working on has to be in that context. Otherwise, people would be locked into inefficient technologies. And if you have standards in, say, 5, 10, 15 years' time, it would be too late.
You want to come in, Marika?
I think also following up on that, I think one of the points you made also from Morocco's side, what we need to see is the national policy and the enabling framework conditions need to be supportive of that scale up and rollout, and the local policies and regulations need to dock into that. And there are some fantastic examples around the world, global north and south, that could really be examples, shining examples that we also wish to share. But I think one of the, linking to the points of financing, so the Cities Climate Finance Leadership Alliance is the CCFLA I was trying to refer to in my presentation, is the group that is trying to also look at the innovation, what new finance tools and mechanisms can we develop. So we need to map still what we can do. Maybe we need completely new concepts and ways of financing. But certainly one of the challenges for local and subnational governments is that they cannot access the funding in many countries. Or from the international system. So we need mechanisms that would enable the flow of finance, but also in a comfort zone where the national governments can keep control and monitor the progress, because we need to have systems that work at the national level as well. But it's up to the national governments to create these systems and the mechanisms that would enable the flow. That we've not seen in many countries, so there's certainly a big gap and potential there. And last but not least, thinking of energy efficiency and renewables combined, we cannot separate the two. We certainly need to think in terms of smaller decentralized approaches, optimized energy efficiency, optimized technologies, switching to renewable fuels as fast as we possibly can. And that discussion is we're only touching the tip of the iceberg. We really need to intensify that dialogue and map intensively roadmaps on a country basis, on a city level, at the regional level, and make sure that we can really address that 1.5 degrees Celsius target that we're aiming for. And we're slow, we're late in this whole discussion, so we need to speed up.
Thank you very much. Just maybe on the last one, reinforce that. I mean, I'm part of writing our gap report every year. And if you look at the curves, both for 1.5 and 2 degrees, I mean, you can't emphasize enough the importance of getting early start. I mean, the longer you wait, the more difficult it's going to be, the more costly it's going to be. It may not be evenly distributed. That's, of course, the problem. But I think in many cases, I mean, let's say we had 100 cities in Paris lined up. So right now we're basically queuing them because we don't have the resources to help cities that actually would like to move right now. And it's a little bit disturbing when there's sort of the big global when you came out of Paris and we got the agreement and now we're going to do things. And actually the private sector partners act on this very quickly. They look at the indices, where are the interest, where's the market potential, where should we go? And then so I said, well, I mean, what's happening to the system? It's not coming. I know it's only 6 months or something like that, but 6 months in many private companies is a long time. So we are really in a situation where if you need to keep these partnerships together, you need to move very fast. And we don't really see it happening yet. Hopefully it's coming. There was a big meeting in here, and one of the reasons they were so hot, there was about NDC funding with a group of donors coming together to try and move on. So I think there's hope, but we shouldn't wait too long, because then we simply won't make the 1.5 at all, and 2 degrees is going to be a huge challenge. I think Brian was the next, and then you cut.
So at the IEA, the way we think about this is that there is actually a lot of funding available, but it's just that the policies are not there that enable that investment to be made. So we're always working with governments to figure out how do we set up policies that both set that baseline, set the energy prices to be correct, and put in high efficiency standards as well that can be targeted. And with that, governments both induce investment, meaning enable other people to invest money. They actually invest themselves, leading by example. And ultimately, you get this continual increase in the adoption of energy efficiency while also having the reduction in the technology prices. On top of that, what we're working on is evaluation of what the benefits are. So that my slide that showed the multiple benefits flower, if we can identify the actual benefits beyond just the energy benefits, we're going to see that many more of this finance can justify spending more money than they would otherwise because there's more benefits associated with it. So I think those are the kind of angles that we look at it from the IEA.
Yeah, until you are not asking questions, then we are talking within the panel and you are listening. No problem, I will be provoking this anyhow. So I'm a bit intrigued by the fact that energy efficiency is the most lucrative business of climate technology intake, and it's very crowded. Even in my agency that I'm part of the UNEP also, there are dozens of initiatives which I don't even know about all of them, which are energy efficiency and so on. So everybody's there, and still 40 countries have come to us and asked that why can't we help them planning their energy efficiency policies or strategies or look at their industries and where they could find the prioritized energy efficiency project and so on. Why they come to the newest baby of the whole bunch of family? Why they have not been helped before? That is my question. Why Senegal and Zimbabwe and who else is here? I mean, I have a big list of countries who have come through their NDE to ask our technical assistance on the technologies and concepts and tools which you have been dealing with already 10 years. And so there is a gap. There is some gap which we have not served, and countries are waiting for that one. And I a bit contest that if we are waiting for the countries to come, that they make such a policies and legislation and regulations which are totally conducive to transfer of energy efficient technologies, we wait another 15 years. And that is that we have to anyhow go by case to get the countries involved. And you are right in that sense that when we are there and work with them, then we are asking them that why can't you make such a policies that might help us together. But that is something which I have been thinking about, facing all this. Now, CTCN is a body of the developing countries themselves, and that's why we don't ever say no to any of these. So when we go to country, we can say that, look, you are asking us to assist you in this kind of energy efficiency, but you have to add some policy issues here, otherwise it's not working anyhow. Any project is not viable economically, even if we get public financing. So in that sense, there is an avenue then for us to indeed work on that policy level, which definitely is needed. Thank you.
Thank you to both of you. We actually have, well, one behind first and up here. It's coming now. It's good. Still have to get used to that thing, yeah?
My name is Anja Wucke. I'm working with the German Development Corporation, GIZ. And 2 or 3 questions maybe, as I had some time to think about it. More efficient appliances many times make us using more appliances or investing in a maybe bigger fridge that we are now able to pay because the new one is more efficient than the other one. So many times these energy efficiency of certain appliances makes more energy consumption overall, looking in absolute terms. And I wonder how far these tendencies are monitored as well in your program, or if you're looking particular for energy efficiency gains only. This is one question. And the other question is related to the building sector. Many times the owner of a building who would invest in energy efficiency measures is not the one who has the gains, because this mainly is the one who is living in the building, who is having the lighting or heating or however. So are there, options to cooperate, or how in terms of financing does somebody who is living in a building or renting a building and the owner of a building cooperate to get to energy efficiency measures and having a win-win situations for all? And maybe a third question, if I may. Many times when we focus our attention to greenhouse gas reduction, we forget about other environmental issues. For example, many lighting bulbs had mercury inside certain time, and we did not think about, they were more efficient, but we did not think about the idea how would be good solutions for their disposal afterwards once they're no more used. So how far do you have other environmental issues as well included in your energy efficiency programs? Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Anja. I think before we go to answer, we'll take the second, well, maybe I don't know how many questions, but leave the second question here, or whatever it's called. It's nice, it's spongy.
Yes, my name is Marie Karlberg. I'm with the Swedish delegation. I just want to follow up on what the representative from ISLE mentioned about combined approaches where you have renewable energy and energy efficiency. And I was thinking about the initiative on Global Alliance on Buildings and Construction, if you consider doing, when you do investments in energy efficiency measures, if you also take into account renewable energy investments. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Are there more? I think you're sort of becoming slightly more brave, but you don't have much time to sort of think about it further. But I take it as a sign of that it's interesting when they also talk up here, because you don't go out. So that let's take a quick round. I mean, there's about buildings. I mean, the owner-tenant issue, rebound effects on things, and of course the side effects and broader and linkages between renewables and efficiency. So who wants to go first? Yeah.
Thank you, John. Yes, to come to your question on building, yes, the Alliance is also looking at the global issue like renewable. And the idea is also to promote green building that could be zero emission or even produce its own energy. That's something, the trend that is really strong in some part of the world, both from north or from the south. I mean, because it's also in places where there's a low grids access, a very interesting solution maybe to start on microgrid or having some autonomous building design. So yes, it's something that is taken into account, and we know also that some other partners are really working on kind of also building more awareness of the linkages between the two, because renewable energy, sometimes you get some more investment, upfront invest costs to put, but if you have a very efficient appliances, and your system is more autonomous, or you can have, for the same energy, more services uses. So the linkages are really interesting, and more people are trying to build around that and probably designing a new energy model and system. So that's something that is also think through this alliance, trying to think the next step for buildings. I would just come back very rapidly, I think, on the discussion before about the gaps and awareness. And I think just getting back to the COP21 and just a few words on that. And first, maybe to thank all the partners here, because they really help us in building alliance coalition and to showcase that this movement was here. And I think they were all involved in coalition and supportive this agenda. And so really thank for that. But we came, I think, in the COP21 with several good, very good initiatives, or one existing from long and that were growing well, and some of us more maybe recent. But I think it didn't get the same visibility as, for instance, as the Alliance or announces on renewables or on other parts. And that's very, I think, a shame, because they were very interesting. I think on lighting, we're reaching, I think, some kind of tipping points with a lot of countries engaged on efficient lighting. And so I think there's still a lack of political awareness, of interest by this topic, which is not maybe as sexy or as in, I don't know what is really behind that, but we need to go, I think, beyond that, and that's why it's, I think, one of the objectives of this building alliance, I think, is to gather ministers of this business of this building community to be aware of the issue and to start working together to develop something. And maybe also, I think it could help in the debate in some other areas. I think they starting to think after COP21 and the Paris Agreement, maybe designing kind of a global roadmap, what it means for a sector to be 2 degree or 1.5 degree, and finding what should be kind of solution in different areas. And I think energy efficiency could be a good candidate also to start thinking about something like that, because we know the solutions in general. Some are quick win solution, I think, and is all the point, John, you raised, I mean, is how we feel, I think, this gap between this good idea, we know that there's interesting returns, but the action is not here. Some are maybe more long-term, like buildings. We require a lot of investments. We got a lot of policies. We got a good enabling environment. And so probably it could be interesting to have for countries, what should be done on energy efficiency to help maybe those who have not start thinking very deeply in that, knowing a bit from which part they should start could be maybe helpful also in this INDC implementation and in preparing the next round of INDCs of our action for country.
Thanks, Rumi. I thought Situnu was making noises over here.
Yeah, I just wanted to answer the two questions asked by the lady from GIZ. The first one on the rebound effect. You're absolutely right. Often when making appliances and equipment more efficient, people tend to abuse them. So if you have a light bulb, you think, oh, it's very efficient, so you don't need to turn it off. It doesn't consume much energy. And that's why you have actually to help people use those sensibly, because a lot of people still actually, we all in general still actually are not really efficient in the way we use resources in general. We waste a lot, from water to electricity. A lot of people don't have an idea actually where does the energy come from and how much they're paying, etc. So one of the ways of helping this is, for example, lighting. A lot of you must have noticed in some meeting rooms or offices or even homes, the light goes off when you're not there. So you don't have to rely on people to turn it off, but you can help with the technology. When there is no movement, the light goes off, for instance. Or for cars, when you drive in, you stop at the stop, then the car stops, etc. For off-grid lighting, for instance, obviously there are a lot of people who live in remote areas and countryside, etc., who are not connected to the grid. So if you take the example of refrigeration, the technology and the innovation on refrigeration is to make those fridges small, and you can also use them like the system you have like on mobile phones that are pay as you go. So you use them actually when you need to, because you don't have a constant supply of electricity. But the idea there is, again, not to make them bigger so they can consume a lot of energy, but make them smaller so they can consume less. On your second question on the environmental issues, you're right, because the old technologies like the CFL for lighting, for instance, has mercury, and that's not good for the environment. So one of the approaches being used, at least in our alliance, working with countries, is not only to put policies in place, have standards, monitor and enforce the standards, as you said, but the fourth most important thing is to work with countries to have collection and recycling schemes, so that you don't just promote the new technology without dealing with the old one, especially if it's polluting, in an environmentally friendly way. So the answer to your question is that's being considered so that people dispose of that in a safe way.
Thanks, Situnu. It's Marika first and then Brian.
I think very much important criteria also to look at that point that you made. Linking to that, we need to look at life cycle emissions of every single appliance. This is, I think, underexplored at the moment. There's huge potential there to make sure that we, from the raw resources to the recycling point, where the emissions cycle is actually relevant and how we can reduce emissions in that process, and how we can stop making products that actually break too quickly so that you need to buy a new one. I think that's part of the thinking. We certainly need better guidance from national governments on that particular point. This links also to green public procurement, for example, is a great tool or an opportunity national governments and all levels of government can use to embed that into your tendering procedures to buy optimal services and goods that conform to environmental standards and quality labeling as well. Taking us to a topic Morocco loves, water and energy. If you want to connect energy efficiency and renewables, water is one of those underestimated sectors I find sometimes. But let's look at, if you have water scarcity, you need to switch to products that like toilets where you do not use water, but also there are interesting things that people don't talk about because it's not sexy. So we need to start talking about practical stuff, I think, maybe more. But on the water and energy side, you can, for example, with renewable energy, you can pump and purify water to move away from fossil fuels, also in the decentralized areas, and make sure you have fresh water for people to use, and encourage them to use water as an efficient resource. So just coming at it from a different angle. I think we really need to look at these practical implementation activities. And looping back to the finance stuff, I think we offer the tap to local and subnational governments to get those local projects shaped, to help them define them, and then to connect to implementation so that we can roll out and scale up the energy efficiency and renewable side. So that's an offer on the table for the financing institutions, for the national governments. Use that and connect to all these initiatives we presented today, because all of them actually are very closely interconnected. Thank you.
Thank you, Marika. Brian?
On the issue of the owner-tenant item, it's really a matter of motivation. And there are policies that can be put in place to improve that motivation. Obviously, one is green leases, and that's one that I think has been much more common, where the owner and tenants both legally in writing determine how they're going to pay for energy. But there are other items, such as energy disclosures and energy performance certificates that can actually impact potentially the way that buildings are valued. So the owner would have an incentive to improve the value of their building, while the tenant has the incentive to reduce their own energy. There can also be other things like tax credits and items like that that can enable a bit of motivation from the owner's side or the tenant side in those situations. Going to the appliance and the rebound effect type issue, one of the reasons we've talked about energy efficient prosperity is to sort of disaggregate this issue of conservation versus efficiency. And what we like to think of is that efficiency, the items that were mentioned, is what is enabling a better life for people, enabling, like in the case of Singapore with air conditioning, really enabled an economy to be built in Southeast Asia when it's really hot and humid. Those types of things in terms of actually increasing their energy use, but having a social and economic benefit out of it. And separating that from conservation, which is more about, I need to use less, or, I'm being told to not have the services that I want. So I think the energy efficient prosperity is an interesting topic from that regard.
Thank you, Brian. I don't think anybody picked up on your question on linkages, a little bit maybe on the renewable energy efficiency. And I don't want to go in a lot of detail, but in relation to the overall targets, we did a study together with IRENA to see, what's kind of the optimal mix to some extent, because you can either do sort of a lot more clean supply and then forget about efficiency. But in the end, the study clearly showed also on IRENA's own study on how to reach the target, that was really difficult. So I think right now it's almost like coming out efficiency first, because I mean, really focus on reducing consumption, and then of course make the supply as clean as possible. And you have to do both. It's not like you have to wait on the renewables, but really not look at efficiency after you change the system. Look at efficiency first, and then change the system at the same time. I think one of you mentioned it also. One of the new focus areas is going to be efficiency for access. There's a new coalition coming out around that with the Clean Energy Ministerial in 1 or 2 weeks. It's already out there, but really to focus on, when you look at access, efficiency has to a large extent been neglected. And if you're looking at small decentralized or village level systems, you probably have relatively expensive supply, even if it's renewable and it's fallen in price. But if you can focus at efficient appliances at that level, you can actually provide much more services to the population you're trying to serve. So I think it's coming in a lot of different ways, and certainly a focus area overall. I think on rebound, I don't want to comment. There's been a lot of comments on it as such, but I think it depends, in my view, a lot on to what extent your sort of energy services are covered. I mean, if I put in an efficient light bulb in my house where I used to have a light of some other character, I mean, I will not automatically put up another light. I mean, you could argue that I won't turn it off because it's so efficient, but I don't really think people change behaviors just because they get an efficient light bulb. So there's certain areas where you don't have it. Then there are areas where you actually have a service need, where having more efficient will allow you to expand your needs and get more needs covered. So I think that's not really rebound. And then there are all the in-between that we heard about. So I think it's sometimes you need to be very specific about what it is, but it's definitely an issue. But I actually think from what we've looked at, it's somewhat exaggerated. It's important, but it's not nearly as important as people often do when they argue, I mean, if you do efficiency, you're just going to use more and then it doesn't matter. But it is a real issue. I think we are getting close to the end, and I think maybe also a little bit to help the Secretariat a little bit, maybe the last question to all of you is this: we've had this process now, we've had 2 meetings last year, we have this sort of summary of things coming up. What could usefully be next steps? I mean, we take new issues up, one yesterday, we have one on Monday. How can this sort of, you say, privilege to some extent of having access to the negotiators, to people coming to the convention, how can we use that? And you just need to say it in sort of 10 seconds.
Yeah, I think you're right. The TEMs have been bringing these discussions that didn't happen before in this environment of climate change. A few years ago, we used to talk about energy much, so it has done really great to bring this, particularly to the attention of negotiators who can then reflect it in the various decisions and the conclusion that's come out. I think going forward, we identified areas where clearly there is a potential there to help achieve the reduction of emissions. Maybe next time would be useful to talk about something more practical that can be accelerated. We touched on that, I think, a little bit today, but you used the key word earlier about the urgency now to do something, because if you don't do it now, then it will be too late. So I think the TEMs can continue in that spirit of urgency and to show the areas where taking actions on those sectors will help with that urgency and keep us below the 2 degrees C.
Linking to that, I think there's an amazing array of guidance and support available for local and subnational governments. What we do need to see is more a connection between the national governments and their other in-country governments in terms of exploring how to improve the dialogue, the coordination, and ideally not as a top-down approach, because the top-down approach does not take into consideration the local needs. So we need to have sort of a peer-to-peer dialogue in country. And how can the local governments and subnational governments support the NDCs? We need to really map that space. And this whole area of renewable energy and energy efficiency is the place to work in all the sectors. So there's huge potential, but that discussion needs to also take place quite soon. Thank you.
Good. I'll do my own part on the line here, just not to act as chairman. Sorry. No, but I think that's very true. And as we started off in the beginning, that these 2 set of issues are really core to the mitigation part of many of the INDCs. So I would certainly encourage finding a way that is not like now we revisit it, now it's over, and now we move to the next thing. Because then it's going to be a little bit like jumping forward from one stone to another one, and in the end you cover all the issues and then it's over. I think it's important that you have a process where you revisit. If you revisit all of them, I don't know, I mean, that you can think about, but no doubt about renewables and efficiency, exactly as I said, are really core to the process on the mitigation side. So if we can find a way, because I think it's a good way, I think maybe we've been a little low on questions, but I mean, the experience from the other TEMs is also that to some extent we're communicating more technical stuff than people normally get in these contexts, because it's more about the convention and the negotiations go on. This is really about energy in technical sense and so on. But I think it's a very useful learning process, and the dialogues we've had the other times, I think have been useful both for, hopefully for delegates and audience in general, but certainly for us to understand the process better also.
Yeah, when I was in the former job as a government officer and negotiator for 20 years in climate, we had a problem that the official climate process never entered into real dialogue with the private sector or action sectors, which are actually doing the work and causing the damage on the ground. And the business and NGOs and research institutions were always around hanging there and somewhere around the room and got 1 or 2 minutes interventions per day. That is not enough. And this is exactly the mechanisms where the governments can meet the sectors on real business. And I'm really a big lover of this particular process if we do it right. But it can't be just a side event. It has to be something where really the negotiators will be coming and seeing that the result of this dialogue will result or is such a guidance from the whole convention, which brings things forward and gives empowerment of all of these initiatives and bodies which we have established. I hope that we go more in depth in sectors, pick up such an issues which are transformational, which are the lowest hanging fruits, which brings that 1.5 degree, which we are aiming at, shorter and faster to us, and have a real dialogue, and then put that outcome to use through the bodies which we have under convention. And I think that we have some ideas we would like to bring in, and we know that there are these prominent people and persons who are going to decide the next phases. So there is only a kind of a way of indicating what could be something which is interest of developing countries when they now have to actually make their minds. So let's try to make this a very fruitful process.
I just want to reiterate that I think this should not be a side event either. I completely agree with that. And I would say even more boldly that I think the Global Alliance for Building Construction should be a facilitator of bringing in technical experts for this bigger event on energy efficiency in cities and buildings. And I think, just the meeting that we had a month ago in Paris, if that was held here, I think we would all be more fruitful from that. So that's my thoughts.
Yes, I think you ask a very important question, and we know a lot of parties are asking that this technical expert meeting deliver concrete result and go a step further in the ambition. But we know it's not so easy, and I will particularly agree with what had been said beforehand. I think we need to really work on this recommendation and bringing to our high level decision maker, I think, some guidance or ideas of the quick win solution, and maybe also on the gaps and needs to work, and making this recommendation to links the different tools like the CTC and the Green Climate Fund, the INDC implementation along the issues that are treated here. I think we need to be also ambitious and try to think about new ideas. I mean, on work, as I just explained, for instance, the example in the transport, or are they starting to put on the table at the international level, in the international community, kind of a roadmap saying, okay, here it's what we should do in the transport. So this could be one of the ideas. I mean, but cannot be made here, but maybe it could be prepared by the community of energy efficiency. And then in the next phase, maybe it could be discussing what it means to be a 2 degree for energy efficiency, having some concrete elements, and maybe we could start having some concrete things to support these quick wins, like I think stopping the incandescent bulb, inefficient lighting. We know appliances, maybe we could get rid of some of this, the low categories of the more consuming appliances and things like that. So yes, trying to build now a new phase with innovative ideas and a lot of recommendation on this quick win, I think, and where everybody agree on what should be done on that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Remy, and thanks to all of you. And I think we've had quite a rich discussion. I think hopefully also some thoughts for the Secretariat at the end here to think about how we can go forward. And thanks to all of you. I think if you do me a favor and give them a last big hand, all of them, I think they've been doing some very interesting talks. And as I said, thanks to all of you. I mean, you're not the most sort of questioning group, but I mean, the positive thing, when you sit at the panels quite often, I mean, what you notice is either people take out their gadgets. Very few people did that. I didn't see anyone who fell asleep. And you could, when you do this quite often, you can actually